That is a violation of the charges number 6, the group of charges which says the violation of human rights, not to have adequate health care and the right to adequate housing, and that the evidence that we have brought in terms of just these prisoners show also a violation of group number 9, a violation of human rights to fair trial, to speedy trial, because you cannot have a fair trial if you don't have a trial at all. You cannot have a speedy trial if you don't have a trial. And the liberty, and it's a violation of liberty, not to be released on bail in the security of person. And we see that in our evidence, Roderick was never even charged with a crime. That although he spent many months in jail, that he was, like many other prisoners, released ultimately because there were no valid charges against him. We refer you to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, Article 3, and it says everyone has the right to life, liberty, and security of person, and to the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, Article 10, and says that all persons deprived of their liberty shall be treated with humanity, with respect, and with the inherent dignity of human persons. They have failed. Romel Madison is part of this history, and he has to come and speak for his family. He has to come and speak for Ronald because Ronald was no longer with us. And he shared with us how in the streets, his brother was butchered. How his brother, who was a witness, his 2 brothers who were witnesses to the assassination of members or friends of the Bartholomew family on the streets of New Orleans, as police officers shot them down. And as they witnessed this, and then later, Brother Mason, Ronald Mason, was shot as he was seen to be a witness. And as his brother ran to get support, to get some help, and he ran into police officers, other police officers, he found out that the people who had shot his brothers were police officers themselves. And that they didn't just shoot his brother when he was watching, but as he turned his back to seek support, to seek help, as he cried to the system for help, he returned to find that when his brother had went down with only bullets in his shoulders, now he had bullets in his back. That he had been shot 5 times, that they had assassinated, killed him. And we find that the mother, father, and the sisters, that James Brissett, the friend of the Bartholomew family, was killed. But even the mothers, the fathers, and the daughters, and the children were shot at. This type of brutality that we have shown you was also testified to by William Tanner. Tanner tells you how in the attempt to save a friend, a Henry King who had been shot, that he became the victim of brutality. In other words, trying to help people, he became the victim of brutality. And likewise, other friends also were brutalized, the uncle and the brother of Henry King. We find these to be violations that we have visited with you with in our materials which you have presented, and which you have when we have given you at the beginning of this the relevant law and the charges which appear in both the brochure with this program as well as the ones that have been presented to the judges. We find that in the group 3 of charges, which we call the violation of human right to life, human dignity, recognition as a person. And those charges are further referenced in this particular document, and we refer to the international covenants which support these charges. We move on to talk about the violation to our women, to our sisters. And we note also in passing that violation number 9 is a group 2, the violation of human right to liberty, security of person, and equal protection. Sister Leventhal came to talk about the violation of women throughout the Katrina episode. Women, even before Katrina, sent to Angola prison where men were, and women caring for themselves and their family deemed criminals like Charlene Smith. The failure to open schools and housing and all the disproportionate impact of women, which someone later testified has caused this city to move from a majority of women to a majority of men. Because women had to leave because of these demonic kinds of behaviors which the system was visiting upon us all. The government's programs to push unhealthy sterilization, to take from women their right to bear children, and to limit their right to determine what they do with their own body. She talked to you about sexual assaults, and we get the implication that these assaults are by other people which the police have not protected women from, but also by the police themselves. More police officers than teachers now, and the children must bring to school their own toilet paper. We heard from Stephanie Mingo, and Stephanie moved us, and she talked to us about her struggle. And these sisters, they came ready to testify, didn't they? Right. They moved us, and they moved our hearts as they talked about their struggle to get in housing. And I think it was Stephanie that told us that she was in public housing. And she reminded us, because I know Stephanie was strong and Mrs. Stokes was strong. You remember Stephanie and you remember Mrs. Stokes. But one of them shared with us, they said, why can't we be in public housing? Bush is in public housing. And even though it seems a bit humorous, just think about the absolute absurdity of that position. I mean, we have to not only look at the testimony and the evidence, but we must look at the interpretation of the testimony and the evidence. How can Bush, a criminal himself, stay in a house which is controlled and paid by the public, and she can't even get in a cheap apartment building? A cheap set of housings or project housing. Bush lives in a mansion, yet he's a criminal that kills millions of people around the world. Bush is the cause of much of what we do in his role as the President of the United States. And this is a relevant discussion here because, remember, we are dealing with the codes of internally displaced persons. And they say you must do all you can to put internally displaced persons in the position which they should be. And so what can the United States really do is a question that we must raise. What can they really do if they didn't spend $450 billion in Iraq to kill people and get people killed? What can they really do if even a mere fraction of that money was used to do in New Orleans, where we live, what they did in Europe in the so-called Marshall Plan? 90% of the residents of the housing projects which she shared with us are women. Closing the project crush her ability and many women's ability to return home. Men, she said, can get more response when they complain. The violation of human rights to return, to resettle, which is in group 2 that we have presented to you, and to reintegration of internally displaced persons is part of what we claim. And the violation of human rights related to missing relatives, because if we remember, Miss Mingo told us that her mother died, and it took them a long time to even let her know what had happened to her mother. We also visit the guiding principles on international displacement. Displacement shall last no longer than required under the circumstances. All internally displaced people under Article 16 shall have the right to know the fate and whereabouts of missing relatives. Housing as an issue that was visited by Tracy Washington, as she told you that there was no money ever given for renters to return. Discrimination in housing, as so-called blood ordinances were passed in the Bernard Parish, which is being rehabilitated while Orleans Parish is not. We now find out that 90% of that parish is white, whereas this parish called Orleans Parish is not visited with the same kind of respect.